short scale flatwound based string shootout, and thoughts on Indonesian-made instruments. Today I'm doing a little experiment to find the optimal set of flatwound or tapewound strings for my new Ibanez AGB200 semi-hollow body short scale bass. I'm also going to talk a bit about my thoughts on Indonesian-made instruments like this one. This video is more or less an unrelated 2-for-1 then, but both topics tie in directly with my experience of buying this particular bass at this particular moment in time, so bear with me. What constitutes a short scale bass? Let's start with some specifics on what I mean by short scale because this gets surprisingly complicated. Most electric bass strings are made for three vaguely defined scale lengths: short, medium, and long. In extremely basic terms, short scale basses are around 30 inches from bridge saddle to nut. Medium scale is 32 to 33 inches, and long scale is 34 to 35 inches. There are other less common scale lengths too, and there's a lot of variation even within these standard scales. And there's yet another snag. A lot of short scale basses actually need longer strings. They might be strung through body like the vintage Fender Mustang design or the Schecter Banshee. Or they might have a two-piece bridge, with the tailpiece several inches behind the bridge itself. That's the case with the Hofner Beetle bass, the Epiphone Viola bass, and this Ibanez AGB200, and others. These basses could probably use most medium-scale strings, but it's not totally straightforward. Bass strings have a round or hexagonal core wire, with additional wire wound around the core. The winding tapers off before the end of the string, so you need to make sure the winding is long enough to extend past the nut to ensure proper vibration. Likewise, a lot of strings come with a silk wrap on both ends, and you need to make sure the silk on the ball end doesn't extend over the saddles on the bridge, because that also can deaden the sound. It seems like every time I venture beyond the familiar territory of the Fender Precision or Jazz bass, I discover new considerations like these that I had not encountered before. I'm not claiming to be an expert on any of this. I just want to share what I've learned for anyone else who, like me, might be considering a bass like this for the first time, so you can be sure to get a set of strings that will work for you. My thoughts on Indonesian-made instruments. Before I get into the string comparison, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about Indonesian-made instruments. This bass was made in Indonesia. Several of the instruments I own were made in Indonesia. It's where most of the low and mid-range instruments available today are made, and most of them, if not all, are apparently made in the same huge factory complex owned by Cortec Corporation, aka Cort Guitars. Cortec is based in South Korea, but their manufacturing facilities are currently located in Indonesia, China, and Vietnam. In past decades, they had facilities in Korea itself, which were shut down abruptly in 2007, among other worker-hostile actions. The situation was resolved in the courts, but then that got tangled up in a later investigation into corruption in high levels of the Korean government, resulting in the impeachment of the president and the arrest of the Supreme Court justice who ruled in the case. I'll admit I don't know much about any of this, and I'm just summarizing what you can find on the company's Wikipedia entry. I'm not excusing any of what Cortec may have done in the past, but there's no indication that they're still doing those things. The fact that they moved their manufacturing operations from South Korea to other nearby countries with lower wages and fewer worker protections certainly isn't a good look. But it also doesn't automatically mean that the workers in the new facilities are being underpaid or mistreated. I've talked before about global labor arbitrage. It's complicated and can be a way to hide abuses, but it's not inherently exploitative. Phil McKnight recently posted a video of the tour he was able to get of Cortec's Indonesian mega factory, and my overall reaction was, it's a lot better than I expected. Yes, it's high volume and, at least in some of the buildings, extremely fast-paced work, but overall, it seems like a clean and professional environment. Of course, we only see what Cortec wants us to see, but Phil toured several of the buildings, and I trust him not to act as a corporate mouthpiece. That video is the only thing I have to go by in assessing Cortec's present working conditions. And of course, I'm still just making the assumption that Cortec is the contract manufacturer for all of these American and Japanese brands who are building in Indonesia. None of them are going to come out and say it, and I'm sure Phil had to sign an NDA to get access for his video tour. But, I mean, come on. I think we can all reasonably assume that if it says made in Indonesia, it was probably born in this factory. A few days ago, Sorehands posted a reaction video that was, less generous than my take on this. Less generous is kind of his thing. But I don't know how realistic it is to compare this Indonesian mega factory to a small boutique luthier shop. The fact is, they're appealing to completely different markets with wildly different budgets. Yes, if you look at what I've spent on various Indonesian instruments on this channel over the past couple of years, obviously I do, or at least did, have the budget to buy one nice $3,000 luthier-made instrument. And yet, I didn't do that. Am I just rationalizing my choice to do business indirectly with Cortec? I suppose that's a factor, but I also don't want to spend boutique luthier prices on a single instrument. It's not because I don't think their labor is worth that much. I think it is. It's just that it would be wasted on me. I'm ridiculously picky, but also kind of fickle. My expectations grow out of proportion with price, and quality reaches a point of diminishing returns.
What's the diminishing?
In my experience, a mid-range Indonesian-made instrument, priced between $500 and $1,000, is much closer in quality to a considerably more expensive American-made instrument than it is to the lowest-end garbage glary you can get for $100 on Amazon. Or, yeah, I'm going to say it, a $200 Harley Benton from Thomann. There's a huge jump in quality with guitars and basses when you get around $300. From there, quality increases much more gradually, even as prices go way up. I don't think it's a coincidence either that $300 is basically the bottom-end price you'll see on an instrument made in Indonesia. I believe that's where you start to get into gear from this Cortec factory. The sub-$300 instruments, Glary, Harley Benton, they're all made in China, not Indonesia, and the quality just isn't there. I'm not saying you can't get a high-quality instrument made in China. You definitely can. I'm just saying you can also get extremely low-quality ones, worse than anything I've seen coming out of Indonesia. And the Chinese-made instruments that are good quality, no surprise, cost more, about the same as the ones from Indonesia. Now, gear snobs are surely going to say I'm full of shit for suggesting anything good is coming out of Indonesia.
And don't call me Shirley.
But guess what? While I will admit I have zero experience with boutique luthier instruments, or even something like the Fender Custom Shop, I do have experience with American production instruments. I've owned multiple American Fender basses and a couple of Ernie Ball Music Man basses. The best of those were definitely better than any Indonesian instrument, but a couple of them were decidedly worse. Especially for instruments that have been made within the last 5 years, I've found Indonesian Squires to be much more consistent than either American or Mexican-made Fenders. If I had spent all of the money for these various basses on one single, expensive, handmade instrument, I would just obsess over any and all imperfections, and believe me, I would find them. It would never, could never, be as good as I'd expect it to be. I still have high expectations from mid-range instruments, but they're more realistic. Which is to say, these instruments actually can meet my expectations. They have, repeatedly, and that's why I'm focused on this portion of the market. Plus, I can afford to buy more than one of them, which lets me try different things, build up an interesting collection, and make more of these videos. And I'm not the only one. This morning I saw Jonathan Wong posted his own video reviewing the natural color version of the AGB200, and he seems to like it as much as I do. I think it's time to move on to the second topic du jour. Let's see which set of strings sounds best on this bass. Short scale bass string shootout. Bella 760N HBB deep Talkin bass, black nylon tapewound for Hofner Beetle bass. Versus Diodario ECB 81M XL Chromes Flatwound medium scale. Versus Bella 760F MUS Stang stainless steel flatwound short scale through body. Whew, that was a mouthful. All of these strings are advertised as having a length from ball to taper of 34 inches, which is kind of the magic length for instruments like the vintage Fender Mustang bass, the Hofner Beetle bass, and my Ibanez AGB200. Even though bass scale lengths are generally measured from saddle to nut, which makes these considered short scale basses with about a 30-inch scale length, they all require several extra inches of string to reach the tailpiece or the through-body ferrules with enough excess to ensure the winding extends past the nut. Most electric basses are long scale. Short scale is already a niche, and short scale with this extra winding length is a niche within a niche. Add on the fact that I also insist on flatwounds, and the number of options dwindles quickly. In fact, these were the only 3 sets of strings that were readily available that met all of my criteria. I thought when I got this bass that I'd be happy with the Bella tapes, so those were the strings I ordered along with the bass from Sweetwater, and I figured that would be it. When I decided after a few days that I didn't like the tapes, I wanted to explore other options. The only set my local guitar center had in stock were the Diodario's. But I ended up ordering them on Amazon along with the Bella Stangs because Amazon was the only place where I could find those in stock. I have both sets in hand now, literally. But before I compare them, some observations and expectations. The tapes don't have as wide a range of gauges as the other sets. Even though they're all pretty low tension, I found the G string is much higher tension than the E string. They don't even seem like they belong to the same set. I haven't measured these strings with a caliper, but oh, wait, I should do that. Here's my cheap Menards digital caliper. 100. 82. 67. 50. Yeah, so as I expected, the gauge is the diameter, including the nylon. That means the actual wire inside is somewhat thinner, which to me says these should feel even lower tension than regular flats of the same gauge, because the tension needed to hit a certain pitch is surely affected more by the wire than by the nylon.
And don't call me Shirley.
My main problem with these strings is how low the tension is. Yes, lower tension is more comfortable to play, but it's so low that it's hard not to accidentally bend notes sharp. The Diodario strings have a lighter gauge G string and the same gauge E string, but I think they'll probably still feel higher tension overall, and I'm mainly just hoping they'll keep me from bending the note just by fretting too hard. The Stangs have the lightest G string of all, but the heaviest E string, so I'm hoping they'll be even better than the Diodarios on the E and not noticeably worse on the G. I'm also expecting a few surprises along the way at the ball end of the strings, since the Stangs are supposedly more flexible at the ball end to account for through-body stringing on a Mustang. Through-body can damage regular flats because of the sharp angle they're bent at across the bridge. That wouldn't be an issue with this bass. I'm just hoping that the flexible part isn't so long that it extends beyond the saddles. I'm betting the Diodarios will be the best overall option, but I'm kind of hoping it's the Stangs, partly because I like the quirky retro package design. Yes, that matters. Don't ask why. Before I start swapping strings, let's check out the Bella tapes. Bella 760N HBB Deep Talkin bass black nylon tapewound for Hofner Beetle bass. Since I want to approximate an upright acoustic sound, all of the demos are done using the configuration I found gets me the closest, which is the bridge pickup soloed, tone rolled off about halfway, and playing with my right hand over the neck pickup. What I'm struck by most about this set of strings, and of course what made me want to try something else, is the fact that it's almost impossible not to bend the note when you're playing, especially if you play with any kind of attack. I like the softer feel of the lightness of these strings, but they're just too soft for the way I play. It kind of doesn't even matter what the tone is like because the pitch is so bad. It sounds almost like a fretless in the worst possible way. But that floppy, bendy feel also means a lot of the notes have weird, inconsistent overtones that just make the bass sound not good. Next, Diodario ECB 81M XL Chromes Flatwound Medium Scale. Okay, first quick impressions with the Diodario strings. I don't know if it's Diodario or a Diodario or if it matters. Definitely I can feel there's more tension. They feel more like what I'm expecting the strings to feel like. I'm still working on getting them stretched out, and I also have not adjusted the action or intonation. I'm not going to be doing any of that until I've decided on which set of strings I'm going to keep on the bass. I can definitely say without a doubt that I'm not going to be putting the tapes back on though, because these are definitely better. I'm going to go on the Diodario website and make sure that these are genuine, since they have a code you can enter to confirm that. I moved on to the Diodario XL Chromes next because I'm trying to move in a steady direction between the changes in the gauges of the strings, but also because, honestly, I felt from the start like I'd probably like the Stangs best, and I wanted to avoid an extra string swap if I could help it. string swap, string swap, string swap. That assumption did not bias me in any way, I swear. I was legitimately interested in trying these strings. The instant I had them on and reasonably tuned up, I could tell I liked them better. They just feel more like the kind of tension I'm used to playing. It was a lot easier to keep the notes in tune, and I avoided a lot of those weird overtones I was getting from the tapes. Let's hear them in action. These are a big improvement over the tapes, no doubt, but this set both feels and sounds more like a regular electric bass. I'm not getting quite as much of that upright sound. There's a bit too much metallic brightness in these strings. Then there's the matter of the nut slots. The nut is obviously cut for the strings that shipped on the bass, which were gauged 50, 70, 85, 105. The difference is most noticeable on the slot for the G string. There's definitely a bit of play there, and it kind of dulls the sound of the open G. Not a huge issue, but worth noting. Time to move on. Bella 760F MUS, Stang, stainless steel, flat wound, short scale, through body. Okay, once again, I'm just tuning up and making some observations as I stretch the strings. I'm already noticing I like the smooth feel of these Stangs better. They definitely are smoother than the D'Addario. They also, the tuning keys turn more easily with these. So these strings need a lot more stretching just because of the way they're wound at the ends. They don't go as tightly around the tuning peg from the start. And when people talk about stretching strings, I might be wrong about this, but this is my observation. I mean, this part of the string does not stretch. What's happening is that it's just getting wound more tightly, because as you wind it initially, there's some play left inevitably in the string, but as you're stretching and pulling, it's pulling that more taut until there's nothing left, and then it stays in tune better. I can already tell these are my favorites. Like I said, I was fairly certain these are going to be my favorites if they work on this bass. They're specifically designed for a traditional through-body Mustang bridge, and the package even carries a warning about off-label use. My biggest concern was that the flexible winding at the ball end was going to extend beyond the bridge saddles. Fortunately, it does not. This may be off-label, but that warning is just so Bella doesn't have to issue refunds for people who try to put these on a top-loading Mustang. I can tell you what Bella won't. Stang strings work perfectly on the Ibanez AGB200. Plus, they feel nicer than the D'Addarios, super smooth. I appreciate the extra tension on the E string, being a 104 versus 100 on the other two sets. And even though this G string is even a lighter gauge than the D'Addario and can wiggle around a bit in the nut slot, the open G sounds clearer and less deadened than the D'Addario. But how did these strings sound overall? Yeah, no contest. The Stangs are definitely staying on this bass. I'm not getting those metallic overtones I was getting with the D'Addarios. The tension feels just right. I'm able to articulate cleanly. The notes ring out pure and true to pitch. And I would say I think these get me the closest of all to my goal of an upright bass sound. Well, that's it for this video. But be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when my full 100-point review of the Ibanez AGB200 is up. Thanks for watching.